Hey everybody, Steve from the Pinball Room. Welcome back today. So we're going to talk more about inserts. We had kind of an overview in that last video, very long-winded video, way more so than it probably needed to be. I apologize for that video. Today we got a more succinct one. I just want to catch up to where I'm at. So the next step for me after playing around with those inserts and the lighting and all that was to try to get them actually cut into a piece of wood, just like we would for our playfield. I didn't bother going straight into my playfield because my problem was I have all these plastics here, varying sizes and shapes, and I didn't have the DXF files for them. Honestly, just as I started recording now, I realized I never even really looked around, so maybe there are DXF files out there already. Maybe somebody's already gone through the trouble of getting these precisely measured and put into a 3D file. If there is one, I'll search for it and put it up here. If you don't see anything by my finger, it means I didn't find one. But there probably is a resource, but I didn't have one. So I was going through and measuring these with a digital caliper, putting that into Fusion 360 in a sketch, measuring their depth, right, their height, and their width and all that circumference, and cutting that in. Now you need to go through and not just do a hole for this or else it falls all the way through. Then you have to do an inner shelf. So basically I'm going to have two circles, right? A big circle and then slightly smaller circle. I'll show you some of my Fusion 360 files here and you can take a look at what we're doing, right? Anyways, long story short is you got to go through and for every shape you basically need to make the same shape a little bit smaller so it's got that little ridge to sit on so it doesn't fall away through your playfield, right? And it was just very, very tedious. The circle wasn't too bad, right? I'm measuring with my digital caliper. Okay, it's 25.7 millimeters. I put it in there. It's too tight or it was too big. I had to adjust back a little bit. I go up and down like 1/10 of a millimeter until I finally got one that actually really worked. It was more difficult than what I thought it would be. For the simpler shapes like circles and squares wasn't too bad. For the squares, one of the things I need to be mindful of was these curved edges, right? This like border radius here. This one I found out is a 3 millimeter border radius for those. That's one of the common radiuses on these inserts, at least the ones I got from Pinball Life. But then you got into some more complex shapes, like these crazy arrows that had curves coming back into them also and having to get that dialed in. You think, you look at it and you think, that's not that complex of a shape, Steve, really? And it's not. It's really not a triangle versus a square, but realizing just how precise it needs to be, though, to where when you look at this, you don't see just like a tiny gap here or up here. You want it snug enough that it goes in. You don't have to like hammer it in and break the plastic, but you don't have it loose enough that it can just fall out, or that's not going to work, right? So getting it that's the right level of precision to be tight and snug and the right depth. Long story short, it took me a lot of tweaking. I probably spent over 20, almost 30 hours in my makerspace over the last week or so, last week and a half, going through and spending 4 or 5 hours at a time at a night. A couple of the nights I was there for like 7 or 8 hours trying to get this. And I mean, fatigue set in a couple times. I think there were a couple times I was recutting the same file instead of downloading my updated file and wondering why it wasn't working and oh, it's still too small, making it too big. Then finally getting the right file, then realizing it was really way too big and going back. And so I cost myself probably a few hours also of just not being quite careful enough on my process for going through this. But at the end of the day, this is just one process I'm going to show you how I did it with a CNC. There's another process I hinted at in my last video that Thibaut, one of the guys from France, he's been doing his own machine. And he's got a pretty slick system for how he's doing his inserts by using a series of 3D printed molds. I'm going to show some of his video here in a second also so you can check out his approach.
Bonjour, c'est Thibaut. Aujourd'hui, je voudrais vous montrer comment est-ce que j'utilise la défonceuse avec une bague de copiage pour prototyper mon playfield avec les inserts.
Turning back, I won't stop.
So there you go. That's a good approach. I like how you can take that and kind of screw it into your playfield and to kind of move it to whichever spot and kind of line it up, eyeball it, you know. There's part of that I actually really like, to actually see it as you're doing it. In the end, though, I feel like the process to go through and set up those jigs. Now, he probably explained in French how he went through and did it. I know he had a bunch of math going on there. But for me, as I'm trying to think, okay, how would I do that? Well, I'd still need to go through and create that shape inside of a 3D space. I would then, instead of be printing out or cutting the insert, I'd be printing out a mold that would go around that insert, right, that I can then cut inside of, and then you got the skinnier one for the other one. Like, it's a slick process. I like it. I think it's an awesome way to go about it. I feel like since I have access to a CNC machine, for me, it's going to be just as quick, or not even better, maybe just go straight to the CNC machine. But if you don't have access to a CNC machine, I think Thibaut's method is another great way to go. You can be very precise with the 3D print, and then it's just a matter of how precise you can put it down on your playfield. So as long as you kind of have like some guides or some lines drawn, you know exactly where you want that on your playfield, you lock it down, and you route them out. Easy peasy, right? It's all about creating that jig, or for me, it was all about creating the shapes I could then cut out of wood. I finally now have a set of shapes here for 13 different inserts that I've worked down that we're going to see how close I got. You can see on the other side of this board where I was doing all these practice cuts. I like cut these arrows a bunch of times, even just the outer shape. This one I had misaligned here, right? But I'm cutting out these shapes thinking I was near final, but then here's another board where I was cutting out the shapes and iterating on the arrows over and over again, and then iterating until I finally felt like I had something. Until I spent a lot of time on these arrows, huh? Plus the diamonds, and then those diamonds. See, those triangles I only did like 3 or 4 times and I got it down. Okay, maybe 8 times. The squares and circles fewer times. These bullets a handful of times. Like, went through a bunch of cuts. But we finally got there. Let's take a closer look now and see where we actually ended up. Welcome to my Beatles Gold Edition workbench here. So this is what we're looking at right around here. And let's see what we got here. So we're just going to take these and start putting them in. So we've got a circle. That goes in. Now, one of the things that I've seen a lot of debate about is how tight should the insert be in the playfield. Some of these you can see I'm able to put in pretty easily. Some of them are requiring a little more pressure to get them in. Talking with people who've done this a lot more than I have. One of the guys, Brian Cox, has done like 15 pinball machines, custom pinball machines. Another guy, Jamie Boyd, is working on a Mindcrime pinball machine, and I think this is like his first full homebrew, but he's been restoring and recreating playfields and things for like a long time, so he's done a lot of insert work. Another guy, John Marsh, or Wolf Marsh, he did the Spaceballs homebrew machine. He's done a lot of work. They all have similar but slightly different processes. I believe I remember correctly, and forgive me if I'm quoting you guys a little bit wrong. One of them, pretty sure it was Jamie, was saying he likes things to be cut to where they're pretty flush, very, very flush. And instead of sanding the inserts down flat, he'll get it as flush as possible, nice and tight. You got to take some epoxy, the certain type of epoxy you want, one that's not going to yellow and turn color, but a nice clear one that's going to stay clear. That will go in. You put a little bit of epoxy around the edge of the insert, set it down in. You glue those all in. You need to clamp them down, clamp them tight, and keep them clamped until they are fully cured. Because a lot of these, the way their edges are, they have a little bit of a slant to the edge to where they almost naturally want to kind of pop back out. Like it's a little bit skinnier at the bottom and gets tighter at the top of the insert. So you get a nice tight grip at the end, but it can also have pressure or a tendency to kind of work itself loose. So you want to have them glued and clamped down. Most of the good epoxy they were talking about require a good 24 or 48 hours. Keep them clamped that entire time before you let go of them, is what they've told me. So that's what I plan on doing. And then Jamie says he likes his to be really flushed with really no sanding needed. And then he'll go through and he'll start clearing. And he'll do a layer of clear, then he'll sand with really fine sandpaper, right? And really fine grit. Then he'll do another layer. And you can do, 4, 5, 6, 8 layers of clear. Depends on how many you want, just how thick you want it. But sand in between each layer of clear. And everything comes up nice and smooth and flat because your clear is going to be on top and you want the clear level. Okay? John Marsh, a couple of the others are like, well, he prefers to have them sitting up just a little bit above, a little proud, or just a little bit above the wood, as we say, right? And then take a block sander, because no orbital sander is going to work. You're going to sand down the wood and get uneven spots. But take a block sander and very carefully go across and sand these down and get them level. That accomplishes two things in his opinion. One, it gets them level again, but it also is going to get rid of any like little marks. Some of these, I wonder if you can see it or not. Let me get a better example here. Every insert is done in a lot, in different lots or different runs. And so they'll have like a letter saying what lot they're from, because hopefully then those will all be pretty much the same size and shape. I don't know that you'll be able to pick up on this. I'm trying to get it reflective. There's a D, there it was almost, very faintly in here. That's the shape of a letter D. Anyway, so this is like a D batch, right? So hopefully all the ones that are from a D will be the same, and I won't have to be adjusting my cuts. A couple of general rules of thumb here, I guess where I'm getting to. So you're going to need to get this sanded flat. If you're going to sand, use a block sander, like a piece of wood, a block that's nice and level, and just sand carefully. It's going to take time, but sand these down carefully. Make sure you're not getting low spots in your wood. Another reason for sanding, even Jamie said, even though he likes to cut his to where they're flush, before he puts them in, he'll go through and he'll sand that down or scuff up the surface a little bit, right? Remove that little lettering so you can't see it, and then just roughen the surface. Roughening the surface is going to help make sure that the clear coat sticks to it when you spray it. Okay, you get a good layer of adhesion to all that. Anything you scuff and that looks funky, when you put the clear on it, it's going to shine right up and be nice and clear. So I've been told, right? So if you see anything kind of like, foggy after you sanded it, wipe it down, but don't worry about it. The clear and the epoxies and all that the clear is going to get it to come back. The clear coat is going to get it to be nice and clear again. So you'll want to rough these down, remove those little tags, the little numbers, the little letters, get those kind of sanded off. So my approach is going to be to go through and get these as close to flush as possible, just barely sticking up, so I can do some block sanding and get off the little numbers and letters and get it level, okay? And then I'll go through and epoxy them, and I'll clamp them, and then I will clear coat them, sand, clear coat, sand, clear coat, okay? Now, obviously, I'm going to do that after I have my artwork down also. I'm probably going to go through and do a test one on just like a slab of wood like this to make sure I get familiar with the process of sanding and clear coating and sanding and all that before I do my final Playfield, because I don't want to learn on what my final one is with my expensive artwork, right? That's going to be all printed out. Good rule of thumb, everybody says some people want them really tight in their wood. Some people don't want them quite as tight to where you have to really pound them in. For me, where I'm ending up is if it's tight enough to go in and not fall out, then that's going to be good enough. So a quick test here can be, I put these in. Which ones fall out when I flip it upside down? 3 of these just fell out immediately. So they're still too loose. Even another good tap, another couple ones fell out. All right, so I had 5 here that stayed in. Those are ones that I'm calling good. They went in and they're all still snug. Okay, they're not going to just pop out from gravity. These other ones, I got the shape pretty close, but they're still just a little too loose, a little too easy just to fall out all on their own. And so I'm going to need to continue to adjust on these a little bit. So I need to continue iterating on those because several of them are still, more than half of them are still popping out. So I'm still just a little too big on many of those. So I will be going back to my makerspace one more time to get them nice and tight. But the silver lining, I guess, is once you have this shape, I will only have to do minimal adjustment for future use, is my hope. Let's go back and talk again about the lot numbers and all that. Part of the reason that's important to know, not just that you sand off the letter, but hopefully if you can get all of them from the same lot. Like let's say you go through and do what I did. You go through and buy 20 or 30 of each of these shapes that you want on your machine from pinballlife.com. Hopefully most of those will be from the same lot and they'll have the same number on them, right? But you might see a couple of D's, a couple of A's, a couple of 8s, a couple of 7s. You're going to need to check samples from each of those and see what is the difference. Is one just slightly skinnier, slightly thicker, slightly taller, slightly thinner? Like you're going to need to measure that out and adjust the cut accordingly. Otherwise, you're going to go through and one's going to sink way down below, or one's just not going to go in, or it's going to fall out. Like there's going to be these variations between each set or each group of molds that were used, right? Or each set of plastic that were created from the molds, I guess I mean. So keep an eye out on that. Another thing is There can be variation with the router bit you're using, whether it's a CNC or just handheld. If you're using the same router bit over and over, and then say like it breaks and you replace it with a new one, the new bit's going to be a little bit thicker than your last bit that was already worn down. And that might change things also a little bit, right? So you need to keep an eye out for that. If you're changing out your bit, do some test cuts. Just double, triple check. Make sure things aren't suddenly loose and falling out. If so, you might need to adjust that back just a little bit again by, you know, 1/100th of a millimeter. Honestly, like it's that level of precision is where we're at on this, which is kind of cool to think about. We're getting that level of precision. Also really a pain in the butt to deal with things at that level of precision. Trying to think what are the other main kind of gotchas that people have been sharing with me. Yeah, just take your time on getting the shapes right. Make sure they fit snug. Get a good epoxy that's not going to yellow. One that will cure up. Most of the ones I've been hearing about from Jamie and Brian and the rest, they're epoxies that will take a good 24 to 48 hours to cure, to fully cure. They might say it's set within like an hour, half hour, but they've all advised keep it clamped the entire time till it's fully cured. Again, to make sure these inserts don't, for whatever reason, start to kind of edge themselves out or anything. Just make sure it's fully cured. And then take your time going through, sanding them down with a block sander, nice and flat. Try using an orbital sander or any other type of handheld palm sander like that. You're going to be getting away the wood every time you get away the plastic. You're just going to start creating high spots or low spots in your wood. It's going to be uneven and it's going to be noticeable and going to be bad. So good solid block sanding, taking a block of wood, wrapping it like a long, even like a chunk of like 2x4 is kind of what I'm planning on doing. That kind of goes like 20 inches that I can be doing kind of like the whole width of the playfield at a time to help minimize the chance that I'm creating low spots along the way. Even pressure as you do that. Block sanding takes time, but in the end, that's how you're going to get a really good level finish and not end up mucking up your wood. If you get it super flush, you feel good about it, all you have to do is kind of hand scuff the surface of each one of those and then pop it in. There you go. That could work. I'd still suggest doing at least a little bit of some block sanding afterwards just to kind of double, triple check that one's not sitting up a little more proud than the other. Again, there's going to be variations and cuts in the wood you're using, exactly how you have it clamped down. All those type of things can bring in variations from one cutting session to the next. So you might have it perfect in your sample wood and you go through your playfield and if things are bowed or not quite clamped the same, the wood's a little different, it might be off just a little bit, so you might need to do a little bit of sanding. One more reason again to have it just a little bit above being flush. So if there is some variation, it's not going to suddenly sink down below the level of that wood, because can't really fix that. Once you've got a hole that's too deep, there's no easy way to fix that other than, I guess, you try to bondo it and fill it all the way up and start over again. That's going to be a pain. So if anything, go just a little bit taller than your wood and sand it down to make sure everything is nice and flush. I mean, it's pinball, right? We want everything to be as level as possible. Okay. Beyond that, that's kind of where I'm at. One of the next questions we've got here that we need to be solving next is, how do we go through and get rid of the hot spots we're seeing behind these LEDs? John Cross, one of the other guys building a machine, I've been talking back and forth, and a couple of different approaches. We'll hit that in the next video, but we're going to play around with ways to diffuse the light, whether on top with artwork or with pieces of frosted plastic below it, or things to diffuse the light itself. We're going to play around with that a little bit because that's going to be one of the next things to solve to make sure we have nice, good, smooth, even lighting. We want these inserts to basically glow, not just have like this dot shining through them, burning your retina from one direction, right? But yeah, okay, so that's the next step in inserts, was the approach for going through and cutting and getting these into the wood. I'm going to go back and iterate on these till they're nice and tight, and in the next video, we'll start playing around with the lights some more. All right, guys? Thanks for watching. We're making progress. We're getting there. March will be here before we know it. I'm getting a little bit nervous. Here it is, almost October. I got exactly 6 months, plus the holidays, so I have less than 6 months. So much to do. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you haven't started your own pinball machine project, your own homebrew project, why not? Get on it. Keep it simple. Doesn't have to have ramps and a whole bunch of crazy things. Start with something simple at first and just get into it. You'll have fun. We'll learn. Come along for the ride, guys. All right. Take care. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.